Hello, I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today, we're exploring the relationship between marijuana and racism. Research reveals a pattern of exploitation similar to the alcohol and tobacco industries. Marijuana advocates say anything less than legalization is racist, while those urging caution have a much different point of view. We're here to get the truth from Will Jones from Smart Approaches to Marijuana. Will, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter. So I work with an organization called Smart Approaches to Marijuana. We're a bipartisan nonprofit organization. In our slogan is preventing another big tobacco, preventing another big tobacco. And really what our goal is to prevent the marijuana industry, the emerging marijuana industry, from repeating some of the public health disasters that the tobacco industry has done in the past, and to an extent that the alcohol industry still does have on society. And so, as I mentioned, we're a bipartisan organization, and that's really the goal of this, to treat marijuana, and as marijuana policy moves forward, to treat it as a health issue. We definitely think we should move past the criminal punitive laws that we've had in the past. But we say all the time that we think the choices of either incarceration or commercialization, both of those are extremes on the spectrum of marijuana policy. And we advocate for and research and look into things that are between those two extremes, more middle road policies where we can remove penalties for personal possession use, but at the same time, we're not creating a new addiction for profit industry that will profit off of profit off of addiction. And so we want to make sure that that does not happen with another industry, just as it has happened with the tobacco industry. Me personally, I got involved with this in 2014 here in DC. And I always tell people, when I started working on this issue, the closest store to my house in any direction was a liquor store. I could go a little bit farther and get to a convenience store, but that store would be so covered with advertisements for alcohol, tobacco, and the lottery that you couldn't even see inside the windows of that store. And so when I heard regulation titled or legislation titled "Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol," that actually concerned me, because I hate what we've done with alcohol, quite frankly, particularly in communities like mine. And I thought there has to be a better way forward with marijuana policy than regulating it like alcohol. And that was the beginning of my involvement on this issue, and I've been working on it ever since.
Yeah, it's funny because in Iowa, we had so many people, especially people that I give credit to for not being stupid, for smart people saying, oh, it's this legislation. We have to legalize, otherwise we're a racist state. We need to do this. And you're right, it's a huge variance between legalization and criminalization. And there's so much discussion about interventions and getting treatment. And we know that a significant percentage of people that need treatment for addiction, and marijuana is high on that list, can't get it. And we know for people of color or people at risk neighborhoods or situations, almost no chance of getting the kind of treatment they need. And so how did this skip such a beat from caring about people and healing people through intervention and treatment to all of a sudden the legalization issue, where, quite frankly, the average citizen thinks it's going to solve a problem like racism and get people out of prisons?
I think what we have to understand is that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. The Washington Post said that if it's legalized, it'll bring in more than the NFL. If it's legalized at the federal level, it'll bring in more than the NFL. There's billions and billions of dollars behind the industry, and it's big tobacco companies. And that's one of the things that we are pushing back against hard as an organization. Big tobacco companies like Altria, the parent company of Philip Morris. We have major alcohol companies as well, like Molson Coors, Heineken, Blue Moon, and others. And so they're seeing marijuana as an alternative product, as another revenue stream. And so it's to their advantage to sway public opinion by whatever means necessary to change the opinion, or to create a climate that thinks that legalization is the only way forward with marijuana policy. And I think part of the reason they're able to do that is because we do need to move forward with marijuana policy. Although it doesn't happen as much as people as much as some stories and some talking points would lead one to believe, there are people that are incarcerated or have arrest records just for simple possession of marijuana. And again, if someone has, it should be a health issue, right? If someone has problematic use patterns and things like that, that should be treated as a health issue. It shouldn't be a thing, though, just simply because someone has a joint, they're going to jail or getting an arrest record. So we do need to change, where that is, where those laws still exist, where that type of enforcement still happens. That needs to change. And it's kind of that desire for change that people do, and that's a good thing, I think, that people want to see that change. But corporations have exploited that and said, here, the only way that we can have effective change is to have legalization and commercialization, when the reality is, as I said earlier, that's another extreme on the spectrum of policies that we should explore. We can look at things like decriminalization. We can look at things like expungements for people that have that on their records, or resentencing. Those are things that would be productive in this policy area. But commercialization just unleashes a whole host of negative public health issues and concerns, and really should be avoided.
Good. I'd like to explore more of your point of view on that. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll continue our conversation with Will Jones from Smart Approaches to Marijuana. See you all after the break. We don't want to miss this.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzzed and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're here with Will Jones from Smart Approaches to Marijuana, an organization referred to as SAM. And as Director of Community Engagement and Outreach for SAM, Will has a unique view of communities, how they're influenced by the proliferation of marijuana, and access to the latest research as well. Will, give us a snapshot of what we're learning from all these experiments happening around the country.
So one of the things that we're seeing happening, and this is a big concern for us as an organization, is the massive commercialization and I would say oversaturation of stores in states, and particularly in certain communities where legalization has happened. And what I mean by that, and again, our slogan is preventing another big tobacco. In Denver, Colorado, an article came out in the Denver Post, and it showed that there's one pot business for every 47 residents in minority communities in Denver. And to paint that, in another way, illustrate that there's more pot shops in Colorado than Starbucks and McDonald's combined. So when we're talking about, that's the level of saturation that we're talking about. I always tell people, imagine you're walking down the street, driving down the road, you see a McDonald's or a Starbucks, replace that with a, pot shop, dispensary. That is what commercialization does. And that's a key difference, by the way, between decriminalization and legalization. Decriminalization doesn't allow for this massive commercialization and exploitation of individuals by an addiction industry. Legalization does. And so that's one of the things that we've seen. We've also seen increased states that have legalized, have the highest youth use rates of marijuana in the country. That's another concern that we have. We are seeing increased rates of driving under the influence and fatalities in states that have legalized. In fact, there have been a couple studies that have been done that show a significant increase in fatal accidents in states that have legalized marijuana. So there's, and then there's rising cases of cannabis use disorder, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, mental health problems as well, like schizophrenia and psychosis. There's studies showing this happening as well, not just here in the US, but other places where they've liberalized their marijuana laws from the high potency products. And so these are areas of concern. And quite frankly, it shouldn't surprise us that we see some of these things because we've already seen it with tobacco or with alcohol. So the fact that as we amplify and create a new addiction industry, that we would see some of the same problems, that to us that doesn't really come as a surprise, but that's what we're trying to prevent.
Now, one of the things proponents of marijuana legalization say is it's not addictive. What do you have to say to that?
I have heard that way too often. Even legislators say, well, it's not addictive. I would just quite simply say, please show me any major medical or scientific organization that agrees with that opinion. There isn't. It's basically the industry that says it's not addictive. And they said the same thing about tobacco. There's footage of them lying to Congress saying nicotine is not addictive. That's an exact quote. And so they're using the same playbook and tactics here, obscuring the science, downplaying the research in order to, kind of create more appetite and acceptance of their product. But the reality is, again, there's no major medical or scientific organization that would agree that it's not addictive. Does it impact you differently than, say, heroin or other drugs? Of course, but that doesn't. I mean, cigarettes. A cigarette addiction also will impact you differently than, say, an opioid addiction, right? So it's not to say that it's exactly the same or that withdrawal symptoms would be exactly the same as it is for another drug. Each drug is unique. Each one has its own ways that it's going to impact your body physically and psychologically, but it is addictive, or according to DSM-5, the term we might use to be perfectly correct would be to have a use disorder. So cannabis use disorder is the precise term for it, but it's definitely a thing, and it's rising in states that have commercialized.
Yeah, we've had guests here that have likened those differences as well. It's like, do you want to get shot by a 22 or a 38 or a 44? These are all bad for you. And because one gun of a lower caliber seems less damaging, should we legalize that one? So we've seen that comparison before. But here's the other thing that we hear proponents fall back on. They go with this alcohol model, but they also say we absolutely are against people under 21 using. Mm-hmm. We don't support that. But the fact is they found with alcohol and tobacco, there's no way to stop it. And some of the things that you talk about, like the density of outlets and communities that target poor communities, actually, doesn't that contribute to youth use?
It definitely does. There's plenty of research showing that. And I think the best illustration just of what commercialization does in the impact that we see the marijuana industry having on individuals, to kind of a snapshot of, or an illustration of what we believe will happen, is from Juul, right? In the space of about 5 years, Juul went from an almost non-existent company, right, to one valued over $15 billion. And single-handedly, one company almost reversed rates of smoking among youth. And so the idea that because it's legal, and I hear this phrase all the time, people say, oh, well, drug dealers don't check IDs, or we should regulate it to keep it away from kids. And I'll say, right, great slogan, great talking point, great for a bumper sticker. But the reality is that a commercial industry that is allowed to market and advertise and make these commercials and advertise on social media, have social media campaigns and all of this, that's way more attractive and gets way more users than that mythical drug dealer on the corner that doesn't check an ID. And companies know this. Juul knew this, which is why they were so effective at what they did and got so many a younger demographic. And the other thing is, these companies need younger users to stay profitable as an industry. And the tobacco industry knows that, because just the way science works, our brains are, if you wait to use a substance till you're after 25 or so, you are much less likely to go into have substance use disorder, whether that's alcohol or use it compulsively, whatever the substance is. That's just brain science. And so companies have a much higher chance of getting that lifelong user from someone that starts under the age of 21. And the other thing is, I tell people, just think back. It's not that, 13-year-olds are going into the store. We're talking about 16, 17, 18-year-olds. They have a friend that's 21, right? And they just say, hey, can you get some extra when you go to the store? It's not rocket science how this can happen. And so when you have it, as you mentioned, massive saturation, massive commercialization, massive advertisement, we're going to see higher youth use rates.
We're going to take a short break and we're going to ask Will to share more on his views on youth and the influence of marijuana misinformation on young people. See you all after the break.
Multiple studies have shown that marijuana can slow both driver reaction and response time, which can be really dangerous. He's here. He's here.
Wait.
What?
I can't drive.
Why?
My. Oh.
Not all internet is priced this good. Switch to Extreme and go super fast for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Oh yeah, hook up your home with powerful Wi-Fi, 99.99% reliability, and speeds that are FCC proven to be faster than advertised. Not all internet is priced this good. Switch today and get speeds starting at 100 meg for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Call 844-EXTREME2 for details.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back. Dad! You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and we're talking with Will Jones about how the powerful and often dangerous marijuana influencers target our at-risk communities and people of color. Will, you're on a roll. Let's keep following that track.
Yeah, I think one of on the last section, actually, we were talking about youth. And one thing I do want to bring up, and this does tie into kind of the deeper issues of injustice that are at play that legalization does not automatically solve. And this has to do with youth. So what happened in the few years after legalization in Colorado, according to the best data on from the Colorado Department of Justice that was available publicly, after legalization, arrests for Black youth actually increased 58%. They increased 35% for Latino youth, while they decreased 5% for white youth. So this is just one snapshot to me that illustrates that the issues of systemic injustice are much deeper than simply legalizing. That legalization doesn't actually deal with the root issues. In certain ways could actually exacerbate things like we see perhaps among youth demographics, because it is still illegal under the age of 21, right? So if you still have individuals that enforce the law with bias, in a way it gives them more opportunity to exercise their bias towards underage users than prior to, just because, again, there's so much more use and so much more availability when it becomes legal. So I think that's one of the things that is not talked about enough and not looked into enough at all. The other interesting thing, and not just on youth, but when we look at states that have legalized, there is no significant reduction in their incarceration rates or their arrest rates of people of color. There's just no state that shows any correlation with that. And so I understand and actually agree 100% that there are systemic injustices at play in the enforcement of our marijuana laws and other laws, quite frankly. But there's no evidence that legalization is solving that, because, again, and to me, I don't know how the industry has gotten away and legalization advocates have gotten away with this, ignoring this point. But if you legalize, you do not change or hold accountable the people that were already enforcing the law with bias. And I don't want to paint with a broad brush. I'm also serve as a first responder in Washington, D.C. as a firefighter. So I recognize the value that law enforcement has in keeping our community safe. So I don't mean to paint with a broad brush, but there are a few bad apples in every profession, right? And so for those bad apples, legalization doesn't take those bad apples out of the bunch, so to speak, right? They're still there, and they'll still find their ways to discriminate or whatever they do that's not right. And so it's to me, it's kind of incredible that now there's this narrative though that legalization is the way to solve it.
Yeah, we start looking at some of these issues. We incarcerate a lot of people that have substance use disorder and mental health problems, and we're not giving them the health and the healing they need. I think we're spending something like 5 to 7 more times money in America on the penal system than we are on mental health and substance use disorder treatment. And when we consider the overwhelming percentage of people in jail and prison have substance use disorder and mental health issues, that's a terrible disparity. And that sort of propagates the disparities that have been, I mean, even if we were to eliminate racism today, if it could somehow magically stop, we still have a lot of people that have suffered on the basis of being imprisoned, incarcerated, because they've been either wrongly imprisoned or not given the treatment and care that they need. It's the same way if we took every opioid off the market today and made them inaccessible to people, we'd have a lot of people in withdrawal, and this would be a crazy place because we have a lot of addicts. You just can't snap your fingers and do one thing. When you look at the communities that you've worked with, maybe communities of color, maybe it doesn't matter. But how do you see the youth looking at these issues? Are they looking at them the same way as we are as adults?
I think in surveys show this from schools that there is massive, much more acceptance of marijuana, thinking, there's massive campaigns that say, it's safer than alcohol and things of the like. And so there's much more acceptance of use while rates of other substances are going down, like alcohol and tobacco, actually marijuana use and acceptance and normalization is going up. Now, you say compared to us, is their perception different than us adults? What kind of worries me is that that's actually the perception of a lot of adults as well, right? And so unfortunately that is, I think youth are picking up on that. It's not just the youth that have this opinion. And, certainly there are people with good intentions that hold these viewpoints. I don't want to say that everyone is trying to line the pockets of big tobacco. But the reality is that there has been a massive disinformation campaign, just like the big tobacco industry used to say that cigarettes were not addictive, to say that nicotine was not a problem, to get their products, advertised on every platform, news, radio stations, TV, et cetera. And then there's massive public health consequences. And I think we're facing the same thing with the marijuana industry right now.
One quick question before we go to break. Does the whole talk of legalization and stuff make that much more difficult to communicate with youth about these risks?
Honestly, I think it can go both ways. Just because there is more normalization around it, I think some of the stigma is removed, and so honest conversations can be had about that. But to counter that, I think it's gone. It's kind of like a pendulum. It's gone too far, right? And so it's easier to have the conversation, but the climate and the kind of culture is that, it's harmless. And I think that is a real concern.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and afterwards we're going to ask Will to share some final comments, insights, and inspiration. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At Mediacom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared. And you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
If I could go back and change it all, I would. I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all, if I could go back, I would. But I can't.
Right now, millions of people and billions of devices are connected to the internet. Homes, businesses, hospitals, schools. The security and reliability of these connections are more important than ever. That's why at MediaCom, we've built a network to protect them. A network that sees threats, fixes problems before they occur, and keeps you going with 99.99% network reliability.
Welcome back. Today on Surviving Bad, we're talking about how the powerful marijuana influencers target our at-risk communities and people of color. Let's see what insights, advice, and inspiration Will has to share with us. Will?
Yeah, so just kind of picking up on where we left off, I do 100% think that there are issues of injustice that, enforcement of marijuana laws, but not just those, all laws in general, that are at play. I think that legalization is an oversimplification, though, of the solution forward. And again, our organization has advocated work for decriminalization. We've worked with Senator Rice, the head of the Legislative Black Caucus in New Jersey, to introduce that, because again, no one, as you were saying earlier, Peter, no one should be incarcerated for a substance use problem. That doesn't really help the individual or their community. And so we do need to change how we treat marijuana from some of the old framework laws, but that doesn't mean create a commercial industry, which again, from the data that we've seen, is in many ways replicating the tobacco and alcohol industry, where the revenue actually, the majority of the revenue is coming from people that have substance use problems. And so I think that's a major concern.
Well, I thank you very much for sharing those points of view. One very last short question. If you were a kid growing up today and you could go talk to yourself as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, what one sentence would you tell them about marijuana?
It's a great question. I'd say do your research. Do your research. See who's behind this, see who's funding it, see the impact that it's had on others, and be informed.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for watching. Check out our website at healthyiowa.org and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.